From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another edition of Cole on Congress. Today we're privileged to have with us as our special guest from the Golden State of California, Congressman David Dreier. Serving in his 14th term in the House of Representatives, Congressman Dreier is the ranking member on the powerful House Rules Committee. In this position, he's able to provide input on every piece of important legislation that reaches the House floor for consideration. During his time in Congress, David's been one of the true champions of free markets and private enterprise. He's genuinely one of the most influential members in the House of Representatives, and he's come to talk to us today about his role on the Rules Committee as well as his recent trip to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Congressman, great to have you here.
Well, it's nice to be with you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say that it is... do the people of Oklahoma have any idea how lucky they are to have me representing them in the country?
Yeah,
I just
right.
wonder. I wonder, and I know you can laugh about this, but I'm just going to begin by being deadly serious. You haven't really talked about our history, and I will say that you served with great distinction on the House Rules Committee when we were in the majority.
To do it.
And I'm hoping very much that we will, in the not too distant future, come back to majority. But I will say that the work that you did throughout your tenure on the Rules Committee was phenomenal, and you've now carried that same kind of work dealing with what is the single most important issue that Washington, D.C. deals with, and that is our nation's security. You've carried that to the Armed Services Committee. And let me just say also that I remember time and time again signing letters when I was in the Rules Committee for you to make the very, very important missions into Iraq, to meet with our men and women in uniform, the men and women of Oklahoma and from around the country who've been there on the front line dealing with what obviously is a very, very challenging and difficult circumstance. And so I just want to say that I always argue that the 5 most important words in the preamble of the U.S. Constitution are provide for the common defense. And your expertise and the time and energy and commitment that you've put into securing our nation is really unparalleled. And I mean that. And I just want the people of Oklahoma to know how fortunate they are.
We're going to have you on this show all the time, but you're much too generous. But it does make me think.
And I'm not a lying politician.
One thing
that
I need to thank you for before we get into the gist of the show. Actually, one of the most rewarding things that I've been able to participate in since I've been in Congress, you made possible on the Rules Committee. Just a couple weekends ago, we dedicated the memorial to the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor. That was a huge deal.
Wow.
To us. There were hundreds and hundreds of Oklahomans there, some of the survivors. It's a majestic memorial. Its backdrop is the USS Missouri, which is about where the Oklahoma was when it sank. And there had been no real coverage of that loss of life. The Oklahoma actually had the second largest loss of life at Pearl Harbor, 429 sailors and Marines. So it's been something people have been working on a long time. But because I sat on your Rules Committee and you enabled me to do it, I was able to submit an amendment to the manager's amendment of the Defense Authorization Bill and direct the Navy to set aside the land, select the site, and get it done in a year. And they did. Wow. But we hadn't been able to do that.
Well, and that is another great indication of your diligence and your hard work to make that happen. I mean, it was an honor to do that, and it is, to me, very, very important work.
Well, again, I couldn't have done it without you, so I appreciate it. But you've got an Oklahoma connection of your own. Let's start there. It's sort of familiarize you with our state.
Or
make them familiar with you.
I often argue that the people in California don't mind that I say that I'm from someplace else, because I argue half my constituents are from Mexico anyway. So they don't really mind that I talk about roots that I have in the Midwest. I actually was born in Kansas City, Missouri myself. That's my home. I'm 6 generations from there. But my father was born in Oklahoma City. And exactly 80 years ago, he passed away a decade ago, more than a decade ago now, almost 11 years ago. And but he was very proud of his Oklahoma ties. My grandfather was a business manager for Mr. Gaylord at the Daily Oklahoman newspaper. It's not even called the Daily Oklahoman anymore.
It's the Oklahoman
Just
now.
the Oklahoman now. And we've always been very, very proud because, in fact, it's all publicly disclosed, but at one point during the Depression, they couldn't pay my grandfather, so they gave him stock. And so I'm proud to be a shareholder in a great Oklahoma company, and my father used to take me regularly to Oklahoma City for meetings of OPUBCO, the Oklahoma Publishing Company, and it spun off into all kinds of great and wonderful things. But no, we would regularly go to Oklahoma, and I love it. I've got close friends in Tulsa, and I've got to say that right now I've been very concerned with the storms, and I know that you've suffered with like nearly 20 lives lost.
Over 20 now.
Over 20 lives lost. You'd said I think it was 18 the other day. Yeah, no, I mean it's very challenging, and we've actually and I'm going to be with my family over the holidays, and so it's going to be the weather has been really, really raw throughout the entire Midwest there, I know.
It's been terrible. Well, let me ask you a little bit about the Rules Committee. Again, that's one of those, I know when I got on it, it was one of those things that people said, well, what does it do? Almost all the other committees, it's pretty evident from the title what it does, but that was not well known, but extraordinarily powerful.
Well, as you know, the real power lies when you're in the majority on the Rules Committee, and it's a challenge in the minority, but we play the role in the minority of the loyal opposition. And again, I'm very sorry that you're not there, and the reason you're not there is that the ratio on the Rules Committee is 9 members of the majority and 4 members of the minority, and so because you were relatively new on the committee, you didn't quite make the cut. But again, I'm looking forward to having us go back to majority status. The Rules Committee was established on the second day of the first Congress, April 2nd of 1789, and the committee was put into place to just go through sort of housekeeping procedures at the beginning, but James Madison was a member of the first Rules Committee. I had a relative who actually served on the first Rules Committee. Richard Blandon Lee was his name, and Light Horse Harry Lee is one of them on my father's side. I come from that line, and so it's always been a kick for me to have had a member of the first Rules Committee in 1789 served there as a relative of mine. But the thing that the Rules Committee did was that in 1858 it was established as a standing committee. And as the Congress grew, the House of Representatives grew in size, it was obvious that management responsibility was really what the Rules Committee was going to be focused on. And so what happened was the Speaker of the House became, in 1858, the chairman of the Rules Committee, and the majority leader was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And so that tells you the Speaker chaired the Rules Committee, the majority leader chaired the the Ways and Means Committee. Then there was something known as Cannon's Revolt in 1910. Speaker Joe Cannon of my home state of Missouri, Show Me State, was somebody there with a lot of controversy, and he was basically forced out as chairman of the Rules Committee, and they still made the appointments. But the Rules Committee was very, key, and still is, in moving the agenda. And I've always said that the responsibility of the Rules Committee is twofold. Number one, to move the agenda of the majority, and number two, to do it in the fairest, most balanced way possible. And it's in that order, because I recognized one of the things that I saw is that you can't give every member every opportunity to amend, because you could see basically filibuster by amendment, dragging out the process. With 435 members, it takes management. And the Rules Committee, in working in concert with the Speaker and the Majority Leader, has the responsibility to move that agenda to the floor. And we always would strive to ensure that there'd be a wide range of views and ideas represented as legislation moved to the floor. It's amazing to see how it's changed since you left, Tom. In fact, I blame the fact that you left. We've seen it become, in many ways, very challenging up there. We put out a report not too long ago showing that they've just really gone over the top in grinding their heel into the rights of Democrats and Republicans. This is not a partisan thing, but they've denied the rights of the American people through their representatives.
I think that's something most people don't recognize, is that you literally can't get an amendment on the floor. You can't change legislation. The Rules Committee doesn't allow that to come forward, and it really does lessen the ability of individual members to impact legislation. You set the limit for debate. You can do all sorts of things that basically make it very difficult to change legislation once it arrives there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But I will say that we do try to encourage an open amendment process, which does allow for free-flowing debate. And we weren't able to do that all the time because, again, members could engage in filibuster by amendment. But we did strive to do that, especially when there would be a bipartisan agreement. One of the things that is misunderstood about this place is that most of what gets done here actually is done in a bipartisan way, and the attention is always focused on the bitter division. Now, you and I believe very passionately in four things: pursuit of a free economy, limited government, a strong national defense, and personal freedom. And those are really the guides that you and I have, and that's the guide really of our party. And ours is the only political party that pursues that as a goal. And so the division on those four areas gets most attention. But there are a lot of things that we do agree on in a bipartisan way. And I will just say again, in your state delegation, I was just before we came on the air talking about the members of both the House and the Senate. You have a bipartisan delegation with Mr. Boren there, who works very hard, but you have played a key role in bringing them together in behalf of all of the concerns in Oklahoma. And I was also saying that Dave Boren, the former senator, was a very, very famous Oklahoman. I had the privilege of co-chairing the Joint Committee on the Organization of Congress with him in 1993, and I will say that in many ways you provide that same kind of similar leadership that Dave Boren provided.
I'm not in that league. You're kind of saying
No,
that.
but it's true that you do, and you're a Republican and he was a Democrat.
Well, I'd like to think he's sort of moved our way over the years.
Oh, absolutely.
And, Dan certainly votes for this a great deal of the
Yes,
time.
he does, and we appreciate that.
We do. Let me ask you this. Let's shift the focus dramatically, actually. And you just got back from a trip to Pakistan and Afghanistan. You're frankly one of our acknowledged experts on foreign policy in the United States Congress. What did you see?
Well, thank you for that. I will say that I've been thinking about this. Some in your audience may have seen this movie, which is just coming out, called Charlie Wilson's War. It's gotten a great deal of attention.
The book's a great book.
Yeah, and but the movie's getting a great deal of attention. In fact, this morning I saw Tom Hanks on the Today Show, and he was talking about it. And exactly 20 years ago, Tom, this past Thanksgiving, Charlie Wilson took me. We had Thanksgiving dinner at the Khyber Pass between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that was at a time when we were working very hard to provide assistance to the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters in Afghanistan who were seeking to liberate their country from the Soviet Union. And the kinds of things that the Soviet Union did then are just, unbelievable. They would drop click pens and candy sticks for children to blow their faces off so that they would maim children and not kill them because they'd be a greater burden on society there. And so Charlie Wilson and many of the rest of us during the mid to late 1980s worked so hard to make sure that we would be able to free the Afghan people from the Soviet Union. And I went over there numerous times. We brought medical airlifts to bring wounded Mujahideen to the United States for treatment and all. And then, of course, in 1989, when we saw the Soviet Union suffer the major defeat that they did in Afghanistan, we as a country basically said, it's over and done with, and we were finished. And we all know the tragic thing that happened. In the next 4 years, we saw the Taliban come to power and Al-Qaeda, and we really were not poised to respond to that. And that's one of the reasons that we learned so tragically on September 11th of 2001, having gone through this in 93 and other terrorist attacks around the world. We learned that democracy is a real work in progress. And while we're not engaged in nation building, that term was used during the 2000 presidential campaign, it's clear that the American people want to ensure that for our national security interest, that we see democracy, pluralism, the rule of law thrive. And right now, I'm happy to say it's happening in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. I was just there, met in Afghanistan with Hamid Karzai and the great president who's addressed us in a joint session of
He's
Congress here.
man.
He is an amazing man. I know you've met with him before as well. And we've had some really tough times, but there is a sense of optimism still in Afghanistan that has just in the last few weeks started to come back to the forefront. And in Pakistan, a lot of controversy over the fact that Pervez Musharraf, who was the Army Chief of Staff, the general, was seen, and he's called by many a dictator. And it's true that he did overthrow his predecessor, Nawaz Sharif, and came to power. But he's been such an important ally in the war on terror that we have worked with him. Now, there have been requests made of him. And frankly, there were 3 requests made most recently, and all 3 of those requests he has complied with. Number 1, he was asked by the President and the international community to resign as the Army Chief, and he has done that. I was, in fact, with him the day that he told this funny story. He said, well, I got up and basically asked my valet, well, what do I need today? Do I wear my uniform or a business suit? And he said he realized then that he had no choice, and he had turned in his uniform, and so he gave up that position as Army Chief. The second, you know that he'd imposed a state of emergency, and on December 15th he announced the lifting of that state of emergency. That was the second request that was made. And the third request was that on January 8th that elections be held. And I will tell you, having met with him, having met with Benazir Bhutto, the former Prime Minister, and a wide range of other leaders in the country, it's very clear that those elections are going to take place. The most encouraging sign for me in Pakistan, though, Tom, was that as you look at these people who, I don't want to say they hate each other, but there's a lot of political conflict within Pakistan. They are united on this goal of ensuring an end to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and they understand that radical extremism poses a threat not just to the United States, not just to other parts of the world, but to Pakistan's stability as well, because President Musharraf faced 3 assassination attempts, and he has gone through a real difficult time. In the Swat Valley, about 100 miles north of Islamabad, in the last few weeks, there's been a very successful strike against the Taliban there, and so we have, again, I believe great hope, and I'm always. I came here with Ronald Reagan in 1980, so I'm continue to be optimistic, even in a situation that's as challenging as that.
You mentioned you came with Reagan. One of the biggest changes you've seen in Congress. You've been here a considerable period of time.
You know, this is, I mean, if I serve one more term, I will have been here for 30 years, so I'm nearly completing my third decade here. Yeah, and it has really flown by, and I will tell you, we just saw a new member of Congress elected. You were very involved with this, from Ohio. His name is Bob Latta. Well, when I arrived here in January of 1981 as a young guy in my 20s, I sat down with his father, Congressman Del Latta, who was the ranking member of the Budget Committee and served on the Rules Committee. And he put together, with former Democrat, now Republican, Congressman and Senator Phil Gramm from Texas, the Reagan budget package. And in May of 1981, the great thrill that I had was voting for that budget, which reduced the rate of growth of federal spending by 17%. And so to shake hands with Bob Latta and welcome him to the Congress, coming from the state of Ohio, was a real thrill. And of course, it brought back to mind those changes, the circumstances that existed then. You know, the acrimony is greater today, of course. The bitterness is greater today than it was then. But I like to remind people that we were part of a permanent minority then, too, and everyone knew their place. And right now, with the margins as close as they are, we can taste winning the majority back, and the Democrats fear losing the majority. And so that's one of the reasons that there is such conflict. And the other thing that I say as a change is, just as we've seen a coarsening in our society, that is reflected in the People's House and the House of Representatives, and that's happened over the past 3 decades since I've been here. But it still is an amazing honor to be able to serve, as I know it is for you, in the People's House, and it's challenging every day, but it's a pleasure to sit with you at the leadership table. I know that you've been so involved, and we're in the minority leadership now, and again hope to get back into the majority. But you offer so much in that role, and I've been there for a long period of time.
You're much too kind. What do you think the big challenges are? How would, again, you know this institution probably as well as anybody that serves in it, probably better. If you were going to pick several things you could change institutionally that you think would make it better, what would be those things?
A Republican majority would be number one. That's at the top of the list as far as changes that I'd like to see made, so we can get our gavels back and all. No, James Madison, I regularly say this, Tom, and James Madison wanted the process of lawmaking to be deliberately inefficient. People often say to you, and they often say to me, why can't you all just get everything done and move it through in the Congress? I said, no, we're not supposed to. Lawmaking is supposed to be an ugly, messy, difficult, laborious process. The old line that you don't want to watch sausages or laws being made. The finished product may be okay, but watching it is ugly. And it is very, very true. And often when I get frustrated over the fact that some senator is blocking an initiative that I want, or somebody, is giving us a hard time, I look up at the Capitol Dome and then I look up into the sky and I say, James Madison's vision is working just perfectly. Remember, the framers of our Constitution were fleeing the tyranny of King George. This one megalomaniac, a lunatic, who had he was omnipotent. And so they wanted to make sure with this separation of powers that no one gained too much power. And so that's why within this institution no one has too much power. And then, of course, are the other two branches, the executive and judicial branches as well. But we are, Article 1 of the Constitution, we are the first among equals. And I always try to remember that. So I guess what I would say is, sure, there are some inside baseball changes, budget process reform that I would like to see made. I'd like to see us go to a 2-year budget process. Spent time on that. I would like to see, just again some minor things here. But I think that by and large, we are a work in progress here. But by and large, I think that the institution functions just about the way the founders wanted it to function.
Of the things you've done in a long and distinguished career, what are the things that you look back on with the most satisfaction? Well,
we mentioned Ronald Reagan, and I think that there are a number of things that come to mind. When I think back on the most exciting year, you naturally say, being elected in 1980 and then winning our majority in 1994 as we did. But 1989 as a year in modern American history, and really throughout history, will have been such an important year. When we think about that, I mentioned at the outset that we liberated the Soviet Union, liberated Afghanistan from the Soviet Union's control in 1989. But that's the year we saw the Berlin Wall come down in November of 1989, and we were struggling in Central America at that point because the communists had established a beachhead in Nicaragua, and the threat of they were expanding their communist revolution into El Salvador and trying to get it into other countries in the region, and we were able to defeat that effort that they had launched then. The interesting thing that really strikes me now, Tom, when I see where we are today, is that the crumbling of the Soviet Union, as far as I'm concerned, really put the death knell into this whole statist, populist, government control vision for the future. As Ronald Reagan said when asked about what the outcome was going to be, is they're going to lose and we're going to win. And it was our ideas that won. And we really did win, and you'll recall, you're a bright guy, you remember Francis Fukuyama, who wrote that famous article called The End of History.
Yeah.
And many people believe that to be the case. And then, of course, we saw the emergence of terrorism. And the thing that has really struck me has been the fact that in this hemisphere, we have the likes of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, who's seeking to expand his statist populist vision of the world into countries like Ecuador and Bolivia and Argentina and Nicaragua, and trying to do all this. And then you have other leaders like President Uribe in Colombia, President Garcia in Peru, who recognize. President Garcia in Peru, Tom, I met with him not too long ago, and he said that if you look at my 5 years as president, he was president from 85 to 1990, he said they were the worst 5 years in modern Peruvian history. He's president again. He was a socialist, and now he's Ronald Reagan. And then I look at what's happening here in the United States Congress. And these policies of expanding the reach of government, increasing the size and scope of government, increasing the tax burden on working Americans, the rest of the world is by and large throwing off those failed policies, and yet we, under the liberal left leadership that we've got now in the Congress, are moving in that direction. So that's one of the things that really does frustrate me, and I find very disconcerting, and I know you do as well.
I do. What are your hopes for the future?
Well, winning a Republican majority. I mean, how many times can I say it? I mean, I just am looking forward to that. And I truly believe that as we pursue these shared goals, that Democrats and Republicans alike share this vision. I mean, I find I've been doing these telephone town hall meetings, and the other night I had a guy came on and he said, "I'm a Democrat." This is in Los Angeles, and he said, "I'm a Democrat." But he went through all of our arguments. I said, "Well, you sound like a Republican to me." He said, "Well, he said, "I always support you." So I think the Democrats and Republicans share this vision that we have. And I think that we need to fight as hard as we possibly can to pursue it. And I will tell you that this struggle that we're dealing with against radical extremism is a real tough one. There's nothing that you and I do that is more painful than talking to the family members who have lost loved ones in this war in Iraq, Afghanistan, or any place else in the world. But I think of a guy who said to me, the father of a man who was killed in the Battle of Fallujah in November of 2004. He said, "If you don't complete your mission, my son J.P. Blecksmith will have died in vain." And that's why it's so important for us to recognize that the sacrifice of the American people is critical here, and it's appreciated.
Well, Congressman, we're just about out of time. That's a good note to end on. You sound like Ronald Reagan. You sound like the guy you came here with. I've enjoyed talking with you today. Thanks for joining us, and we appreciate your service in the Congress of the United States. And I very much hope to rejoin you on the Rules Committee. I think people have gotten a little flavor just listening to you of what it's like to serve with you on a committee. It's just
it's a pleasure.
Tremendous.
You are sorely missed. You were sorely missed.
Oh, I think just the numbers missed.
Let me close by saying again how lucky the people are of Oklahoma to have you representing them here.
It's a
very,
privilege
very
to do it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.